when it comes to Genesis 1, 2, and those terms, Tohu and Vabohu. But when we see the whole first chapter of Genesis, we can see differences compared to the pagan accounts. For example, God doesn't struggle with the forces of chaos, right? Uh, for those who would think there is, it is only assumed. There is no firm evidence that God is fighting and wrestling with forces of chaos. Again, I wouldn't mind because it sounds like an amazing plot. Give me popcorn and I'll watch that kind of movie, but we don't see that. Second thing, we don't see that chaos is God. We don't see chaos being divine at all in the same fashion as in pagan accounts. Also, primordial waters are not personified, right? They're just waters. They're not, um, again, some deities, like, for example, Yam would be this serpent in the pagan literature. Okay. So when it comes to Genesis 1, 2, and dilemma regarding this topic of chaos camp or primeval chaos, let's dissect Tohu and Bohu. What is Tohu and what is Bohu? Not just translated directly from Hebrew, but also in their own context.
So the other place that we actually see this is in Jeremiah, where the context there is the judgment and exile. So the idea of tohu va bohu, which is the Hebrew terms underlying our English translations in Genesis 2, you have a combination of ideas here. You have the idea of emptiness, and you have the idea of a wilderness where, so the emptiness is there's nothing there, like there's no beings, there's no life there at all. Whereas the idea of wilderness is there's something there, but it's not conducive to life yet. And I think these two terms connect to the structure of the days of creation. We have the first 3 days of creation where God is structuring the environments. So he's fixing the problem of tohu. He's fixing the problem that there's nothing at all that's ordered. But then there's no life in those things. So the second set of 3 days is where God is putting the life into the environments that he has then made. So the tohu va bohu is kind of structuring our entire first chapter of Genesis. And it's these first 7 days of creation is overcoming the problem that we have in the tohu va bohu. And there's a reason that the waters are there, that the deep is still there. But the deep is not something that is the personified evil. It's not a character that God is doing anything with. And I would personally argue that we tend to read this and we think, well, God made everything happen. Like, this is our idea of creation out of nothing. So he made everything out of nothing, and then suddenly it's all chaotic. So why did he make chaos? I actually think there's a better way to look at that, because first of all, the ancient person would not have been thinking about creation out of nothing until round about the Greek era. That's when they're thinking in terms of nothing versus something. But in the ancient world, it wasn't that dichotomy. It wasn't nothing versus something. It wasn't nothing versus something now exists. It was order and chaos, order and disorder. So God started with something that was disordered. And my contention is the reason for that would be because that thing is not God. It's not perfect. So, of course, it's not going to be ordered. And this is part of what this is why he's creating. This is what he's doing in our lives, in creation as a whole. He is making something that is not him to be something that is approaching him. Like, That's why we have the incarnation. I mean, not the only reason why we have the incarnation, but God was always intending to join himself with creation, and he was always intending for creation to move towards him and his glory. And so uh, it's not that, and you see, the pagan literature, it's always the deity or a thing that is chaos, right? It's a material aspect of the world. I don't think that's actually what we see in the Bible. It's like chaos is the opposite of God. It's the opposite of order. So chaos isn't just this thing that God manifested. It's something that exists because there's a process that God is doing from one point to another point. That's why we have creation, we have things that happened up until Christ, and then we have things that happen from Christ till the eschaton. And that's when everything is going to be actually perfectly ordered. But it takes all of that time, and we're like, why is it taking all of this time? Why does God do that? Well, we're here because God does that. Like, if He didn't take His time, we wouldn't all be here. So I think we should be glad that God is using a process, and this is why He is sovereign. This is why he is worthy of worship, because he is our creator and he has all of the best interests in mind for everyone and for creation as a whole, and it's all going to be accomplished. We're going to get there in the end. And that's not something that we have to worry about, but we get to participate in that because we are God's imagers, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. Like, that's how we were created in Genesis 1. That's I don't know. I think that's amazing.
It is. It is. I agree. In my research of these words, Tohu would mean traditionally a desert or a waste. Many translators suggested formlessness, confusion, unreality, emptiness, or nothingness. These describe chaos, if we can summarize in just one word. Some scholars assume the existence of a watery chaos in Genesis 1 2. Bohu in Arabic would mean to be empty, or in Akkadian would mean emptiness or famine. Now, when it comes to the whole that term, not just tohu or not just vabohu, but the whole expression tohu vabohu, which is usually translated in English without form and void, you quoted Jeremiah 4 rightfully, as many scholars do, because they say that's the only other passage in the Old Testament or in the whole Bible where we see this expression, and it's not nothing. It's not nothing. It just simply means that there is darkness, there is this desert, the deep. They give all these words in Hebrew, which yeah, I will not even try to read, like Hoshek, Tehom, and others. Um, but basically, it's without form and void in both of these places, but it's not nothing. It just means that it's not inhabitable. Maybe yet, maybe it will never be, if that's a sort of God's judgment, but still it doesn't mean nothing. According to David Tsumura, Jeremiah 4:23-26 also means tohu vabohu, like Genesis 1 2, but in Jeremiah it means a desert like state of the earth, or not being productive. And I like this is why I love theologians. This is why I always go to the sources. This is why whenever I talk with people about some theological topic, I always like to know if they're quoting a scholar or just their opinion when they read the Bible, or maybe they Google them, like, boom, I did research. What kind of research did you do? Do you mean, did you go to the library? Did you buy some books? Did you read some scholarly articles from academia, edu, or elsewhere? Or did you just Google it? Because these type of research processes are very different. This is why I always rely on scholars. That doesn't mean they don't make mistakes and they don't err. Of course they do, but the context they provide brings clarity in anything we study when it comes to the Bible. Thus, Genesis 1 2 probably means not terrible or deserted wilderness, but the earth was not being yet normal or productive for life against again, this is what Tsumura is saying, David, and I agree with all the scholars I've been reading and assessing, so I could prepare the outline and the material for tonight. Maybe I'm biased, and we all are to a certain degree, but I like this scholar the most when it comes, at least to this topic. Basically, Earth was lifeless.